Me again, Louise Hvala. In this episode of Gatehouse Insights, I'm on a mission to uncover the realities of starting your own legal practice and what you need to know before making that leap. And who else to better shed a light on this subject other than Sach Fernando? Make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all. So we're very interested to know how you became immersed in this world of the legal profession and what made you decide to go down the personal injury path.
So I always wanted to be in a profession where I can help people. My mum was a lawyer, and so I had that benefit of seeing her practice, and I wanted to be in a profession where I can help individuals and hopefully contribute to society. So for me, personal injury just worked. With that said, I didn't necessarily choose personal injury. I like to think it kind of chose me. I had done 3 clerkships in my penultimate year at law school at Landers, Allens and what it was known then, Middleton's. And I was rejected by all 3 for traineeships. So I applied everywhere and went with the law firm that offered me a traineeship. Then just began to love the work. Became very passionate about the work, and for me, being a personal injury lawyer really gives meaning and purpose to my life. And you have that concept of helping people. You have that intellectual stimulation in being, forensic in your analysis. When you analyse these people's lives and their medical conditions, and you do get to contribute, to the life of an individual who's going through a very difficult chapter in their lives, but also make a difference to their families as well, because when they're involved in an injury, it changes their lives completely, changes the trajectory of their livelihoods, and we really, as personal injury lawyers, get to make a difference. So I enjoy that.
In terms of, you've done a short stint, obviously, in the commercial space.
Yes.
How do you compare it to personal injury?
So in my second year of practice, I was approached by Minters to work in their insurance and corporate risk department. My time at Minters was short-lived. It was short-lived because for me, I didn't get much job satisfaction in that role. Because like I said earlier, I went into law to help individuals. And I think when I'm defending matters of WorkCover litigation, I was working for the insurers at that time, I just didn't get that job satisfaction. With that said, it was probably one of the best things I did for my career. The learning and the training I got at Minters was structured. It was high quality. I got to work with some amazing people. So from a career point of view, that was one of the best things I did. And it also, when I returned to plaintiff personal injury law, gave me that competitive edge, because I knew how the defendants worked. And so understood the reason why they were making certain decisions, and could, I suppose, formulate strategy on how to best win my case.
If someone's deciding to go down the personal injury law path, how would you say, plaintiff or defendant, and how would you decide which side is right for you?
Yeah, sure. I think everyone should do both. At least give the other side a go, particularly if you're a junior lawyer. So for me, having done the plaintiff work first gave me that understanding of individuals and what their concerns were about, and the tests that they had to meet. And you can really, you develop a lot of empathy when you're working as a personal injury lawyer. Whereas when you go to the other side as a defendant lawyer, you do have to be quite commercial in the way you do your work. I suppose commercial considerations can come into the way of you resolving matters as well, which can be a good and bad thing. I particularly didn't love that aspect, because ultimately we're dealing with people's lives. But nonetheless, I think it makes you a better practitioner to get both plaintiff and defendant experience, and I highly recommend it. particularly if you're at that sort of second year lawyer stage where you do have enough experience in your jurisdiction, you're still junior enough, you're still wondering what the other side might be like, and particularly if you've identified that this is a jurisdiction that you'd like to be in long term, I think that getting that insight into the other side is only a great thing.
Now, you've recently launched your own practice.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What inspired you to make that jump?
A few things. Like I said earlier, over the last 8 or so years, I've become really passionate about this jurisdiction to the point where it's not really work. It really does give that purpose and meaning to my life. I had also been quite interested in business, and last year I did this course at the Melbourne Business School. And I got to meet some great individuals who run their own businesses or who are in very high positions within their businesses. And after I completed that course itself, I thought, you know what, I've got to do this. I've got to start my own law firm. I had ideas of starting a practice very early days in my career, but then I thought it's not practical. It's too risky, it's going to be too costly. I'm not made out to run my own practice. But after doing that course and meeting these individuals, that really inspired me. But I didn't want to take the step without first, being an accredited specialist. And so last year I did the accreditation course through the LIV, which is a very full-on course, to say the least. Very little direction, and you're juggling it with full-time work and family. And last year we had a baby girl, and so it was hectic. But I'm glad I did it. And so once I did that course as well and got through the accreditation, became an accredited specialist, I thought, all right, the time is right. And I really wanted to do something different. I wanted to move away from that traditional model of practicing law. A lot of people are embracing the use of technology now, even bigger firms, and I think through the use of technology we can really make legal practice very efficient, particularly in my jurisdiction. So with Maxiom, we're paperless. We work using our laptops, and we can work from wherever we are. So I've just employed a law clerk who is a mother of 2 children. She has the benefit of working from home. She has certain hours that she works, and she reports, she either calls me or emails me with questions, and whatever whatever she wants to talk about, she'll give me a buzz, and we have really good communication, and I think that's important when you offer that sort of flexible work arrangement. But we embrace technology, we have flexible work arrangements, and through those efficiencies we're able to keep costs low. Cost low for our clients, who are at the core of our firm. We have a different sort of fee structure insofar as our clients know that if they come to Maxiom, they get to keep at least 90% or more of their settlement money. And beyond that, everything is offered no win, no fee, which is not unique to us. The whole jurisdiction is no win, no fee, but we have those other efficiencies where we're able to keep costs low and also be accessible to clients whenever, wherever they want us. So there's no permanent head office as such. We have multiple consulting rooms in Berwick, Croydon and Epping. And so wherever the client wants us to meet in those areas, we can see them there, or even travel to their homes, or somewhere local for them to meet. And I think that's so important in this jurisdiction because people are injured and they can't travel far. So we've got to be accessible to them. And also moving away from the model where they'll call a firm, they'll speak to an assistant, and if the lawyer is available, they get transferred. Or if the lawyer's not available, having to wait days or, at times weeks at a stretch to get a call back. My clients all have my direct number. And it's my personal number, and it works. It really works because they know that they can call me directly and I'll be able to give them that advice. And having the accreditation behind me, there's only 130 of us accredited specialists in Victoria. They know that they're going to get high quality, good advice.
Touching on I suppose you and your law clerk work remotely.
Yes.
For firms or say other people wanting to obviously work remotely so that teams aren't together, what's some strategies they should implement at the very beginning to help that be very successful going forward?
I think you definitely need to establish the parameters and establish good communication strategies between you and your employees. We touch base regularly. We meet regularly. We'll meet physically at least a couple of times a month, and that's important. Our firm is small enough to have that sort of consistent culture, and I've brought Anna on because I know she's fantastic, and also she's a really good cultural fit. And moving forward, they're the types of individuals that I will look to employ for Maxiom. People who are empathetic, people who are passionate and committed with a solid work ethic. So you've got to employ the right people, but also keep the lines of communication open, and do certainly meet face to face at least a couple of times, because I think it's the way that the legal landscape is changing, and I think employers have to offer flexible work arrangements. People appreciate that there is more to life than work, and I certainly, having started my own firm, that was probably one of the biggest realisations. I was in a senior position at my previous firm with responsibilities in business development, supervising. Work was my life. Despite the fact that I have a wife and I've got a little child, my primary focus when I was at that firm was my work. But starting my own new practice, I had a lot of time to myself at the start in particular, and I got to step outside even to the front yard with my little girl Giselle, and just she's fascinated by everything, and just kind of seeing how she would react to birds and planes and cars, and I really want my employees to have that, to have a balance between a career as well as a commitment to family and children.
So starting any new business comes with its rewards and challenges.
Yes.
What have you seen as your rewards so far, and can you share some of the challenges you've faced?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no shortage of either. If I start with rewards, I break down rewards into 3 categories: personal, professional and financial. And in this jurisdiction, when it's no win, no fee, the financial reward doesn't come immediately. And that's okay. You go into it knowing that that's how it's going to be. It can be stressful, no doubt, but you become okay with that. Personally and professionally, you grow heaps. You're no longer just a lawyer. Your marketing, your accounting, your bookkeeping, business development, you name it, your IT. So you really learn new skills in all of these categories. I mean, you don't become an expert per se, but you really acquire new skills. And I think both professionally and personally, that's only a great thing. Personally, you really become mature. I feel I certainly have grown as an individual in the short space of time I've been in my practice. I've had to be. I've had to face issues that I have never faced before in establishing a business and just the day-to-day functionality of running a business. But fortunately for me, I've had a really good support group around me. And you can't make this decision without a supportive partner, supportive family and friends around you, and a network of people to go to in the event that you do need guidance. It's challenging. For me, I felt quite isolated. I lost that collegial support, that stimulus of having ideas and opinions volunteered, whereas now I have to go and seek that out. And that's also okay, it's just a new way. But it is quite isolating when you begin. So that was one of the biggest challenges. And also, managing that sort of cash flow and understanding how to manage it, and also complying with all the regulatory requirements. The legal profession is highly regulated, as it should be, and you want to make sure you do things correctly, so that there's no scope for criticism. But when you're establishing a firm, you're trying to generate work, which is an integral part of any business, to then also focus your energy on everything else. It's a challenge. One thing I wanted to achieve was a better work-life balance. But when you're establishing a business, it's all work. I mean, you get the benefit though is you get to break it down as you wish. In terms of your time, so you can afford to spend a couple of hours with your family during the day, and then make up those hours at night. There's no one saying no, you're 8 to 6, and that's you've got to do those mandatory hours. But you learn on the job, and you have to embrace the challenges, and ultimately, you learn and you grow as a professional and individually from those challenges. And I can't emphasise enough the importance of having a support network. I've had some great mates around me who are also in fairly senior positions within their organisations, who I can go to with questions. And that's so important, particularly when you're in this practice and there's no other colleagues around. Now that I've brought on Anna, I certainly, have a colleague, but nonetheless, when it comes to that sort of high-level decision-making, I am surrounded by a really good support network that I can go to.
How do you manage everything from, I suppose, the IT, the admin, finance, marketing, business development, and actually working the files and meeting clients? It's hard. It's hard, and I was, time management comes into it. You've got to be organised in order to do all of those things. But I would be disingenuous if I were to tell you that one person can perform all of those functions effectively by themselves. So for me, the way I now manage it is I've employed someone for bookkeeping. I've got accountants, and I now have a law clerk whose services are invaluable, and I've engaged marketing support, so that way I can focus on delivering high quality legal advice to my clients, and focus on business development, and focus on growing the business. So for me, the strategy has been, time management, being organised, but also employing the right people to perform those functions. And the role of a bookkeeper and an accountant is so fundamental to any practice, because the Legal Services Board, for example, requires that you prepare a certain number of reports, and you're preparing them properly. And so for me, I was quite petrified at the thought of something going wrong, or not having, if I were to do it, stuffing up the reports. And it's at no fault of your own. It's just wasn't aware, or you didn't know how to do something.
Exactly. And that's a risk that you just can't afford when you're running your own practice, because if your license, if your practicing certificate is taken away, then you can't do anything. And so although it is another expense, I just thought I'd employ them to do it properly, to make sure everything's above board and compliant. And I focus on my clients and growing Maxiom.
Now you mentioned before that you've grown both personally and professionally. What are some of the things that you've developed in over the last couple of months?
Certainly, I've had to mature as an individual. It can be quite an emotional ride, particularly when you start off. I certainly hadn't started a business prior to this. And so you learn to deal with those emotions, and you learn to be okay with, challenges that come your way. Challenges that you sometimes don't expect You know, I mean, you do your research, you do your due diligence, but you can't predict everything. And some things are thrown at you, and it's a spanner in the works, and you just have to mature, you have to, you know, take it in your stride and deal with it. So I think I've grown in that aspect, and also one of the biggest learnings is the fact that there is more to life than work. For me, I came to that realisation shortly after my resignation, and when I was spending more time with my daughter. And although running your own practice is, you know, involves a lot of time, and you are dedicated more than ever, you're probably working more than ever, perhaps it's becoming a parent as well, you just learn to have the separation between family and work, and you obviously understand the importance of your role as a parent, and yeah, it's been great in that regard, particularly given my little girl's so young. She's 14 months, and so it's a really interesting time in all of our lives. But it's just it's really funny seeing some of the things that she does and says, and you get to embrace that. So you know that concept of, you know, maturing up, and professionally, you realise your potential. I think you continue to realise your potential when you're doing something like this. You know, you're no longer just a lawyer, and had I not taken this step, I wouldn't have realised what I was capable of doing. You know, understanding certain softwares, or whether it be identifying efficiencies in my own practice and finding ways to cut costs for clients, and, you know, streamlining processes, and that's been a fantastic thing. And the network that you're exposed to, because you find yourself dealing or interacting with other people who've started their own businesses, and they're some of the most inspiring people you'll meet. So I certainly, you know, have embraced this new role, and I'm really grateful for the people I've met, even in this short space of time. For the most part, people are supportive. You get the odd individual here and there, as with any industry, but for the most part, you know, my colleagues from this jurisdiction have been very supportive, and that's only been a great thing. Because it gives you that confidence this will work. And even if it doesn't work at the end of the day, Louise, and it's, you know, we're under 6 months, ultimately, I won't die wandering. You know, I've given it a go, and I'm giving it a great go. So we'll see where it takes me.
What advice would you give to others that are thinking of starting their own practice?
I would say to anyone, certainly do it, but know your stuff before you do it. I would tell them to do the accreditation course through the Law Institute. As taxing as that process is on you, it's worth it. So I would highly encourage that they do the accreditation course, be a specialist in what you do. So have that added level of credibility to your name, because when you do start a business, the way you compete is based on your quality, exclusivity, accessibility, and costs. So I think you need to be an expert in your field, or certainly be very good and understand your jurisdiction. I would say do your research, understand your competition, identify where your business is coming from, and position yourself in those areas. Network, you know, have established referral networks, and you know, I would say if you're passionate about it, it's a no-brainer. You've got to do it.
Now, we hear from a lot of women about managing, I suppose, work and family and everything else.
Yes.
But we really never hear from men and how they actually manage it from their side of things.
Yeah.
Can you share some thoughts on that, and from your experiences, how you actually manage family, work, friends?
Yeah.
Other things you might do outside the law?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've identified the importance of a work-life balance more than ever now that I've started Maxiom. For me, managing that requires me to manage my time appropriately. So, 3 days of the week, generally, I'm at my consulting rooms. 2 days of the week, I'm either in the city or I'm working from home. But I separate my time. So, for example, if Giselle's at home, spend a few hours with her, make sure that I'm there during, the feeding time, particularly during the night feeds and the night, by that I mean the dinner, the bath, and the bedtime at night. So I allocate several hours for that process, and also to spend time with my wife, because she's gone back to work full time, and she works. Her role is quite a senior role, and she has her days at work, and it's important that I'm there for her as well. And weekends, I do find myself working weekends now more than ever, but nonetheless, we will do things as a family, or we will go out for dinner. And I think that's important. You've got to make time for yourself. You've got to make time for your family over and above the commitment you're making to your work. As men, Louise, I think we're probably not as good as women when it comes to time management. I never had this right. I don't know if I have it right now, but I certainly am more conscious about it, because I think becoming a father has influenced that. Because prior to that, I was just entirely focused on work. And nothing can get in the way, and my commitment to work hasn't changed. I've learned to do it in a more efficient way, so I can balance my work, my business, and my family.
For grads coming through, obviously their law degrees, and they're going through that whole process of finding a job, and they're wanting to practice, the process can be quite disheartening for many of them.
Yes.
Because it's quite long, and
Yes.
they're not always getting yeses. What's some advice you'd give them to keep going and to actually get ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. You had an interview on this program where it was discussed that only 17% of grads actually end up working as lawyers in practice. And I think that's really unfortunate, because there's a lot of demand, but there's a demand for grad roles, but there's just not enough jobs or grad roles going around. I'd say to those law students to not give up. I'd say to them there will ultimately be a position for them, and just have that faith that they will ultimately find a job. But you can't just have faith and not do anything. You've got to volunteer your time. You've got to, get into certain jobs where there is a customer service focus, for instance. I certainly encourage law students to work whilst they're at uni. There's an emphasis when it comes time for grad positions on work experience. And I think employers value not just legal work experience, but any work experience, and particularly customer service experience. I certainly remember when I was going through, that time in my career, and I was asked questions about my retail job. And when I was going through uni, I worked at least 25 hours a week, either in retail. I worked at Myer and Telstra. And employers would ask, or tell us about a difficult customer that you had and how you dealt with it. And I had real life examples that I could share. I'd say certainly, try and find work, part-time work whilst going through uni, and volunteer your services at these wonderful community legal centres we have throughout Victoria. You get to further the objectives of our profession in giving people access to justice, but at the same time build really strong legal skills in communicating with clients, file management, dealing with difficult opponents, and not give up. Be persistent. When I was rejected from my clerkships, I was so disheartened. I remember the day that those offers came out, and for me, that was 9 years ago. And I got a call from my supervising partner at Allen's at 9:18 a.m. And I won't forget that, because when I picked up the call and she said who she was, I was like, oh my God, I've gotten Allen's. How did I get Allen's? I was certain I got the gig. And then she said, Sach, I'm just calling to let you know that you just missed out. Just my heart just broke. It was just so crushing. But almost immediately after, I just applied everywhere, Louise. I applied at family law firms, criminal law firms, personal injury law firms, and I was prepared to do whatever, and I was prepared to work wherever. I was just fortunate that I got a job at a very good firm, which was thriving, and ultimately I just became immersed in the work, and that work for me gave me purpose and meaning, and I found my passion in personal injury. So that's what I'd tell any grad who's disheartened, or any law students who are going through their degree. Really put yourself out there, and get experience wherever. You need also to do things outside the law. You need to have extracurricular activities that you do partake in. Travel. At the end of the day, employers look for not just someone with a high distinction or distinction average. They look for people who are going to be a good cultural fit to their organisation. And you can certainly identify that during these interviews. You can identify whether the person can have a conversation with you, or are they, do they have these rehearsed answers for those typical interview questions? You can make an assessment about someone and whether they'll fit into your organisation at those interviews. So the more you have experience in work, travel, hobbies, more you can talk about at these interviews. And I think that makes you more employable.
So the legal landscape is changing. Where do you see it all going in the future?
The legal landscape is definitely changing, and I think the legal industry has embraced technology more than ever. And I think if you are contemplating starting your own practice, there's never been an easier time in some aspects because of the technology that we have accessible. So I think law firms need to really embrace that and embrace flexible work arrangements, particularly for women returning to work after having children. But I mean, beyond that, for anyone who have other interests that they're committed to, but don't want to compromise their legal careers. So I think the landscape is changing to embrace technology, and it's moving in the direction of flexible work arrangements. And I think in order to retain good quality staff, you've got to give them that flexibility. And also, law is becoming more and more accessible. And I think practitioners also need to move away from the traditional lawyer-client relationship where clients would call, make a time to see them through the assistant, or have to wait either weeks or months before they can get in to see a lawyer. I think lawyers need to be more accessible, and I don't think accessibility necessarily compromises quality. It has to be balanced, and you've got to have strategies in place to make sure that you're able to perform whilst also being reasonably accessible to your clients. And also, I suppose, the way in which we practice law, it doesn't necessarily require you to have an office on Collins Street, for example, or have hundreds of employees. You can still deliver high quality legal advice to clients from wherever, I mean, whether it be at a co-work space or whether it be through video conferencing. There's so many ways to now deal with clients, and I think our industry is changing, and it's changing for the better.
And that's it. That is the end of another episode of Gatehouse Insights. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this video with your friends. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel where you can see more.